I cheated on my husband just once and never thought he'd find out. Deeply regretted it. But he disappeared from my life, leaving me with a mess. Now, here I am, spiraling, because I have no idea where he is. The house is completely stripped of his things, and when I say everything is gone, I mean there isn't a single trace of him left. I get that this might sound dramatic, but it's the absolute truth. This isn't a joke. I genuinely have no idea where Ryan is, and the uncertainty is eating me alive. How do you even begin to process something like this? One moment, he's here, and the next, it's like he never existed. I wouldn't go as far as to say he's missing, but the whole situation feels suspicious, and I'm beyond confused. And honestly, there's a chance this is somehow my fault. Let me back up a little. My name is Jessica, I'm 25, and I work as a massage therapist. My boyfriend, well, ex-boyfriend now, I guess, his name is Ryan, and we were together for 3 years. We met when I gave him a massage, and the connection between us was instant. Things escalated quickly, and before we knew it, we were living together. Ryan, an accountant through and through, is obsessed with his work, almost to the point of being a total bore. When we decided to move in together, I hesitated at first. The place he picked was way pricier than the budget-friendly apartment I used to live in, but he was set on getting it. Now, don't get the wrong idea, Ryan isn't some provider type who insisted on covering all the bills himself. He's the kind of guy who believes in financial equality, which basically meant I had to cough up my share of the rent even if it meant stretching my income thin. Working as a massage therapist means my earnings depend on how many clients I get, so on slow days, money was tight. But Ryan? He didn't care. He's not the type to splurge on a woman. Sure, he bought me gifts and took me out sometimes, but when it came to actual financial responsibilities, everything was split down the middle. He wouldn't explicitly say it, but it was clear that he wasn't the kind of guy to invest in a relationship. So, if you thought I struck gold by dating an accountant, let me stop you right there. The expensive apartment wasn't even our style, it came fully furnished, so all we had to do was add personal touches. And now? Now, it's just me left in this overpriced place, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. I've barely slept since I realized he was gone. I keep replaying everything, trying to make sense of it, but I keep hitting a wall. At first, I wanted to believe it was something else, some other reason, some misunderstanding, but deep down I knew. I knew what it had to be. Still, I refused to believe that Ryan actually found out about my mistake. There's just no way. It was a one-time thing, a stupid moment of weakness that didn't mean anything. And since he wasn't there when it happened, how could he possibly know? If you're wondering why I don't just call him, trust me, I've tried. He blocked me. Completely. No warning, no fight, nothing. Just packed up, disappeared, and erased me from his life. At one point, I even considered reporting him as a missing person, but let's be real, someone who's truly missing doesn't have time to neatly pack their bags and block their girlfriend before vanishing. I know you're all waiting for the details about what happened between me and Ryan. I'll get to that. But I can't let this be the reason I lose him. I can't. He's everything to me, and the thought of life without him is unbearable. What happened was a mistake, one that means absolutely nothing. I love Ryan more than anything, and I refuse to let this be the end. Right now, I need to let his family know what's going on. I'll update you all as soon as I can. Update 1. I'm back, though I doubt anyone was eagerly waiting for me. Honestly, who would miss someone in my position, right? I've seen the comments, and yeah, a lot of them aren't exactly kind. Some of you have gone out of your way to call me all sorts of names, which, to be fair, stings a little. But I guess I brought it on myself. I won't sugarcoat it, I cheated. And not just with anyone, but with Ryan's boss. That's a hard pill to swallow, even for me. But come on, some of you are acting like I committed a crime against humanity. It was one mistake. Just one. And I regret it more than I can put into words. I will never let something like this happen again. I just got back from meeting Ryan's family, and let me tell you, that was an absolute nightmare. The level of drama was beyond anything I could have imagined. I'll get into that later, but first, let me explain how I ended up in this mess with Ryan's boss in the first place. For those who don't remember, I work as a massage therapist. My job requires close physical contact, and sometimes that can feel a little intimate, whether it's meant to or not. That's just the nature of the profession. But before anyone jumps to conclusions, let me be clear. I always maintain my professionalism. That's non-negotiable. And yes, if you're already assuming that Ryan's boss ended up on my massage table, you're absolutely right. Ryan has always had an issue with my career. He's never hidden the fact that he doesn't like what I do for a living. More than once, he's made it clear that he hates the idea of me working so closely with clients. I've always pushed back against that. It's not fair for him to look down on my job, especially considering it's the very reason we met in the first place. The irony? He came to the massage studio I worked at, and that's how this whole relationship started. He booked a session with me, enjoyed it, and then booked another. He told me his accounting job was stressful and that he needed regular relief from the tension. And that's what I do. I help people ease their stress. That's what makes my job fulfilling. But despite that, Ryan's discomfort never went away. He couldn't stand the thought of me working with certain clients, and convincing him otherwise was impossible. He's one of those guys who's stubborn to the core. And speaking of stubborn, let's not forget his sister, Sophia. She never missed an opportunity to remind Ryan that my profession wasn't respectable and constantly accused me of cheating, even before any of this happened. But that's a story for another time. I never met any of Ryan's coworkers because, honestly, there was never a reason to. Our professional lives were separate, and we liked it that way. But that changed about a month ago. Ryan and I ended up at a party where some of his colleagues were also in attendance. Turns out, it was actually his boss's birthday celebration, something his coworkers had put together for him. Funny thing is, Ryan hadn't even planned on going. He was supposed to take me to a club that night, and I had no idea about the party. When I realized what was happening, I felt guilty. I had no clue that it was his boss's birthday, and I felt bad for pulling Ryan away from an important event. So I apologized, to Ryan and to the whole group, because it really did feel like I had messed up their plans. Of course, his coworkers laughed it off and told me I was overthinking it. They even joked about how it wasn't a big deal. Part of the reason I felt so bad was because Ryan had originally agreed to spend the night with me, but looking back, I probably should have considered that he had other commitments. Then came the moment I met Ryan's boss, Brandon. He shook my hand, told me not to worry about anything, and asked about my profession. The second I said I was a massage therapist, I could practically feel the irritation radiating off of Ryan. At first, I didn't get it. I had no idea why he was so bothered, but it clicked later. He hated my job, and he hated the idea of his colleagues knowing about it even more. His coworkers, on the other hand, had the complete opposite reaction. They were all intrigued, asking why Ryan had never mentioned it before. Some even joked about booking an appointment with me. It was all lighthearted fun, at least, that's how I saw it. But Ryan? He didn't find it funny at all. The shift in his body language was instant. He went from being tense to outright livid. It wasn't long before he snapped and told his coworkers to drop the idea of ever booking a session with me. When we got home, I confronted him about his reaction. I didn't understand what had made him so upset. His coworkers weren't being serious, so why did he take it so personally? What exactly was he so afraid of? And that's where things started to spiral. I didn't want to be the reason Ryan had problems at work. Being the only woman in a room full of men meant that sometimes they got carried away, cracking jokes and making lighthearted remarks. I figured it was harmless. But Ryan? He made it clear that he found their comments disrespectful, and rather than push the issue, I let it go. No need to upset him further. To me, it was nothing more than workplace banter. Just guys being guys. So imagine my shock when I realized they weren't joking. Especially Brandon. Seeing him at my workplace was like a plot twist I never saw coming. I hadn't expected him to show up, and the moment I spotted him, my mind started racing. How did he even know where I worked? Then it hit me. I had mentioned it that night at the club during introductions. Before anyone rushes to call me desperate, let me explain. I wasn't trying to get attention. I was simply doing what any professional would. We work on commission, and when I hear potential clients expressing interest, of course, I mention my workplace. It's not like I was the only massage therapist there. If they wanted to book a session, they had other options. So I saw no harm in it. Still, seeing Brandon standing there caught me off guard. I walked up to him and asked what brought him in, genuinely curious. He told me he'd had a long, stressful day at work and figured it was finally time to get a professional massage. Apparently, he'd never had one before and wanted to support the place I worked at. That was his reason for coming in. And let's be honest, Brandon isn't just any client. He's the kind of man who turns heads. Even my coworkers took notice. A few of the women I worked with were immediately drawn to him, but since they were all occupied with other clients, that left only one available therapist. Me. At first, I tried to get out of it. I didn't want to be the one to massage him, not with everything that had happened at the party. But I had no other appointments, and leaving a paying customer waiting wasn't an option. I tried to persuade him to wait for someone else, but he claimed he had a prior commitment and couldn't stick around. So, reluctantly, I took him in as a client. When the session ended, he surprised me by tipping $75, far more than I was expecting. At first, I refused, but he insisted. I wasn't about to argue, so I took it. That night, I went home and told myself it wasn't a big deal. Just another client, another session. But I didn't mention it to Ryan. Not because I was hiding anything, at least. That's what I told myself, but because I knew how he'd react. If he was furious about his colleagues even joking about booking a massage with me, how much worse would it be if he found out his boss actually had? I convinced myself it wasn't worth the argument. It was a one-time thing, so why stir up unnecessary drama? Except, it wasn't a one-time thing. A week later, Brandon came back. Unexpected, unannounced. And once again, I found myself in the position of having to provide him with another session. Only this time, things didn't stop there. Somehow, after the session ended, I found myself at his apartment. I already know what people are going to say, so go ahead. Call me whatever you want. I know how this looks. But the truth is, it happened so fast, I barely had time to process it. One moment, it was just another routine massage, and the next, everything spiraled completely out of control. I wish I could say I didn't know what I was doing, that it was some kind of accident. But that would be a lie. Brandon invited me to his place, and I went. Maybe it was the way my coworkers had admired him, or maybe it was the fact that he was undeniably attractive. Either way, I let myself get swept up in the moment. I made a choice, a stupid, reckless, unforgivable choice. I cheated on Ryan. And the second it was over, the reality of what I had done hit me like a bucket of ice-cold water. I had just betrayed my boyfriend with his own boss. It was reckless. It was insane. And worst of all, it was entirely my fault. For a brief moment, I considered telling Ryan the truth. Coming clean, confessing everything. But then I thought back to his reaction at the party. He was furious just thinking about his colleagues getting a massage from me. What would he do if he found out about this? No, I couldn't tell him. So I made another choice. I kept my mouth shut. Brandon was adamant that we should keep what happened between us a secret. He reassured me that it was nothing more than a one-time mistake, something that would never come to light as long as we both kept quiet. He promised he wouldn't breathe a word of it as long as I did the same. Of course, I agreed. Telling Ryan was never an option. Let's be real, if I had even hinted at the truth, that would have been the end of us right then and there. Ryan wasn't the type of guy to give second chances. He wasn't one of those hopeless romantics who let emotions cloud their judgment. He was pragmatic, logical to a fault, and when it came to relationships, he saw things in black and white. That's why I never deluded myself into thinking I was living some kind of fairy tale romance. I knew I wasn't some enchanting, irreplaceable princess in Ryan's eyes. So, I did the only thing that made sense. I buried the guilt, put on a normal face, and acted like nothing had happened. And for a while, it worked. Or at least, I thought it did. That's why, when I came home a week ago and found our apartment empty, it threw me completely off balance. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I went about my usual routine, made dinner, and waited for Ryan to get home. He always worked late, so I expected him to be a few hours behind me. But the hours dragged on, and still, no sign of him. I waited. 10 hours. No call. No text. Nothing. Panic started to creep in, so I finally tried calling him, only to realize I'd been blocked. Confused, I went to our bedroom, hoping maybe he'd left a note, some kind of explanation. Instead, I walked into a closet that was half empty. His side, completely cleared out. I stood there, staring at the empty space where his clothes used to be, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But the truth was right in front of me. Ryan was gone. And somehow, I hadn't even noticed him pulling away before it happened. I tried calling him from another number. Blocked. I tried again with a different phone. Blocked there too. That was it. No fight, no warning, no dramatic confrontation. Just silence. For the first 6 days, I refused to believe it had anything to do with my mistake. In my mind, there was no possible way Ryan could have found out. But after posting my story online, I started to rethink everything. The more I mulled it over, the more I started to wonder, had he known all along? My suspicions were confirmed when I finally decided to visit his family. I hadn't told them anything at first. I figured there was no reason to drag them into it. But after 6 days without a word from Ryan, I felt like I had no choice. I needed answers. I didn't get them. The second I stepped into their house, the atmosphere was ice cold. It was clear from the start that I wasn't welcome. If I had any sense, I would have turned around and left right then and there. But I stayed, and the moment they heard why I was there, the gloves came off. Sophia, his sister, wasted no time ripping into me. And somehow, she already knew. I didn't even have to confess. All I said was that Ryan had disappeared, and the next thing I knew, she was throwing my betrayal in my face. She looked almost satisfied, like she had been waiting for this exact moment. She called me pathetic, sneered that she had warned Ryan from the very beginning. She had always insisted that dating a massage therapist would end in disaster, and now she had proof. She mocked my profession, claimed I had never had a real job to begin with, and told me to get out of their house. I tried turning to Ryan's mother, hoping she'd be more understanding. She wasn't. She wouldn't even look at me, let alone have a conversation. Even his younger sibling acted like I was invisible. It was clear. I wasn't getting any answers from them. They knew where Ryan was, and they weren't about to tell me. By the time they pushed me out of their house, I wasn't just confused anymore, I was certain. Ryan knew. And yet, I still couldn't stop asking myself one thing. Where had he gone? Update 2. Well, it's official. I no longer have a boyfriend. I'm single. Dumped. Not that this should shock anyone. If anything, it was inevitable. I'd love to sit here and say I didn't see it coming, but that would be a lie. Deep down, I knew this would be the outcome. I just didn't want to admit it to myself. I ignored the signs, pretended things were fine, and convinced myself that I could keep moving forward like nothing had happened. But in the end, my own actions came back to haunt me. If you're wondering how I finally got my answer, it was simple. I realized Ryan's family wouldn't have known about the situation unless Ryan had been in contact with them. Which meant he hadn't gone far. He was still in town. And that's when it hit me. He had probably gone back to his old apartment. I didn't waste time. Early in the morning, I went straight there, hoping to catch him before he left for work. And just like that, I ran into him. I knew exactly what time Ryan left for work, so I made sure to be there early waiting. The last thing I wanted was to show up at his workplace and risk running into his boss or his colleagues, who were probably already well aware of everything. That would have been unbearable. But none of that mattered once I saw him. Ryan was colder than I had ever seen him before, completely detached, like I was nothing more than a stranger. He didn't even let me get a single word in. All he said was that it was over. There was no discussion, no room for negotiation. He had made up his mind. As far as he was concerned, there was no way he could stay with someone who had betrayed him with his own boss. Desperate for answers, I begged him to tell me how he had found out. And that's when the pieces finally fell into place. Turns out, after Brandon's birthday celebration at the club, Ryan had started getting suspicious. Some of his colleagues had joked about booking a massage with me, and that set off alarm bells in his head. So, he did what any calculated, strategic person would do. He took action. Ryan had always been familiar with my workplace since that's where we first met, and as it turned out, he had friends there. People he trusted. After that night at the club, he asked a few of them to keep an eye on me. And I, stupidly, never even considered that possibility. I had let my guard down completely. To make matters worse, I had introduced Brandon to my colleagues as my husband's boss. I was so careless, acting like I was untouchable, never once thinking about how this might come back to haunt me. Apparently, Just 4 days after getting the information he needed, Ryan went straight to Brandon and confronted him. And Brandon, being an idiot, admitted everything. Ryan recorded the entire confession. That wasn't all. After getting what he needed, Ryan wasted no time reporting Brandon to HR before packing up his things and leaving the apartment. If you're wondering why he didn't just kick me out, the answer is simple. Our lease was already up for renewal, and he had no intention of extending it. He was always 5 steps ahead. Instead of throwing me out, he just left, cutting me off completely. The worst part? For days after he disappeared, I went ahead and renewed the lease with my own savings. I convinced myself he would come back, that he just needed space, that everything would somehow be okay. Now, here I am, alone, broke, stuck in an expensive apartment I can barely afford, and, of course, single. Before leaving, Ryan made one thing crystal clear. I was never to contact him again. Just yesterday, I found out what happened to Brandon after all of this. At first, Brandon denied everything when HR called him in. He thought he could talk his way out of it. But Ryan, always the strategist, waited for the perfect moment. Once HR had Brandon's initial statement, Ryan presented them with the recorded confession. That was the final nail in the coffin. If Brandon had been honest from the beginning, HR might have just given him a slap on the wrist, a suspension, maybe a forced apology. But because he lied first and got caught afterward, his credibility was completely destroyed. He was demoted. The official reasoning? His behavior was deemed disruptive and damaging to the work environment. Unable to handle the humiliation, Brandon chose to resign instead of accepting the lower position. His pride couldn't take it. And honestly, that's not my problem. We both got what we deserved. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I don't regret what I did. The shame, the guilt, it's all consuming. But at the very least, I can take comfort in knowing that Ryan got the justice he deserved. He won't have to work under the man who ruined our relationship. I live with my mistakes every day. I know I let Ryan down. I embarrassed him. I hurt him. And there's nothing I can do to change that now. But life moves on.